New Thought Media Network is proud to present New Thought's Roots and Branches with Reverend Dr. Ruth Miller. Join us every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Mountain Time. Tune in live or watch anytime on our YouTube channel. Discover the rich history of New Thought and its impact on modern spirituality. Join Reverend Dr. Ruth Miller as she shares insights, stories, and teachings that inspire and uplift. Experience deep insights and transformative teachings that connect you to the roots of New Thought. Visit our YouTube channel to catch up on past episodes and join us live every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Connect with us and be part of the journey.
And hi there. My name is Ruth Miller, and I am here for the New Thought Roots and Branches show. This is our 24th episode, which means two episodes for every over 12 weeks or 4 over 6 weeks. And we are completing the 20th century major teachers today. We're going to focus on that amazing woman, Louise Hay. Louise Hay is called by some people the nearest thing to a saint. She is also known as the essence of New Age. She is the leader of the New Age publishing world with her company, Hay House, and is a powerful, powerful teacher of New Thought principles that she learned from one of Ernest Holmes's students. So we're now in our 3rd generation, or actually 5th generation, of teachers in the New Thought tradition. So as we look at our map, we can see that we had all those ancient students and scholars and writers talking about the principles that got woven into the work of Ralph Waldo Emerson. And we see how Phineas Quimby developed his healing method, and then they taught people who taught people who taught people. And way down there on the bottom row, we have Louise Hay and the Hay House. On our next image, we don't see a picture of her because she didn't form an institution. And however, she did teach people how to use her methods. And there are people all over the world who are certified Louise Hay facilitators and instructors. And I think you might even be able to find some here on the New Thought Media Network. In our next slide, we see some of the pictures of Louise Hay. And we can see she worked for a very long time. She started very early on in her life, and she lived 90 years and never really stopped working the whole time. The first two are headshots from the world of the 50s and 60s. The very last one there in the blue jacket is one that was taken on her porch at her home on her 85th birthday. But I like the one where she is just admiring her flowers. Louise was amazing. She really went through some really tough times. As we can see in the next slide, she wasn't born with the name Louise. She was born with the name Helen Vera, and her family was a mess. Her mother and father divorced very soon after she was born in 1926, and that's a hard time to try to get a divorce in this world. Then her mom, trying to support her, would be gone for weeks at a time. I don't know exactly where she was parked when her mom was gone. And then finally, her mother married a man who turned out to be incredibly abusive and required very heavy labor of the child, Louise, as well as the mother, did awful things, both verbally and physically, to both of them. And Louise stuck around as long as she could. She made it through elementary school and the sophomore year of high school during the Depression. And finally, at 15, she left. She dropped out of high school, got a job as a waitress, was raped, unfortunately, had to give up the child, and then left LA as soon as she could get the money to hop on that Santa Fe Railroad and head the opposite direction from the direction that all of the people we've talked about so far in this series were headed. She got to Chicago. She did whatever she could. I'm imagining she did some house cleaning, probably did some waitress work. She never talks about it, but she called them menial jobs. Yes. In 1950, she had saved up enough money to get to New York. And in New York, she found or was approached by a modeling agent who said, "We need to change your name." And her name was changed to Louise, and she was discovered to be an amazing fashion model. She worked as a physical model as well as a photograph model for Bill Blass and many other high-end designers. And one of the people who came to admire her work was a businessman, Mr. Hay, and he married her and brought her into the jet-setting world of business in the 1950s and the 60s. So she was married in 1954. She was 28, not yet 30, and was the height of her career and her life. She probably never thought anything could get better than that. Having that kind of life, having that kind of a man, having that kind of a world, able to go anywhere, do anything, have beautiful clothes. And then in the next slide, we see it all came tumbling down. In 1968, he abandoned her for another woman. And the divorce was final in 1970. And in that period where her life has just fallen apart completely, there is a chance discovery, and she understood later it had nothing to do with chance, of the First Church of Religious Science on 48th Street in New York City. She wandered in. She heard words that resonated with her. She read materials that made sense. And this woman, who never graduated from high school and never went to college, began to study. She studied with the Maharishi. She studied, that's the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, that's Transcendental Meditation. She studied anybody she could get in touch with. If people came to speak at the church, she would read their materials. And she became a religious science practitioner in 1970, and not 1970, excuse me, in 74, and was working at that time. If you were part of religious science, I've had several people who, in my world, who became practitioners at that time, and they had to have 3 documented complete transformations, ideally physical healings, remissions of cancer, dissolving of previously considered uncurable diseases. That was part of how they became practitioners in those days. So she worked for 3 years supporting herself as a practitioner, and at the end of 76, she printed a little book. She was compiling a collection of symptoms and then the treatments she used that had an impact on those symptoms. And she began to see the emotional connection. She'd see someone having this symptom, and she'd see they had this emotional state, and then she would come up with a treatment to address the emotional state that undid the symptom. And that was her trademark method for the rest of her life. She compiled those treatments symptom by symptom in a little tiny pamphlet, fold over letter-sized sheet of paper. She called the Little Blue Book. And she showed her Little Blue Book. She had it printed, and she showed it to her minister, and he looked at it and he says, "Oh, this is very nice. And you'll probably want 250 copies of that so you can share them with the church and with the people that you treat." And she looked at him and she said, "Oh, no, I printed 3,000 copies of it." And he was just taken aback. What are you going to do with it? What she did is she sent an individual copy to every church in the religious science directory at the time, saying, "This may be useful to you." And of course, many people ordered more because it is very useful. And she took it with her as she returned to LA a few years later to complete her ministry training in religious science and to continue to do her practitioner work. But in between, something happened to her. And in the next slide, we find that she was diagnosed with incurable cancer, and in 77, most cancers weren't they? And it was a vaginal cancer, uterine cancer. And she came to equate it or realize that the emotional issue that she was dealing with was all that abuse and that rape as a child. And it was showing up in these angry cells in that part of her body. So she used that same technique, get in touch with the emotions, treat the memories, and also cleaned up her diet. She went fully vegetarian. She ate very few grains, so it was fruits and veggies and nuts, and took on reflexology, a little bit of massage, a lot of transcendental meditation, which is 20 minutes twice a day. And she also did various cleansing, colon cleansing, and other kinds of things to help, as she said, clear my mind and body of the toxins from the past. It took a little over a year, but she was declared cancer-free in 1978. And I think that was when she realized it was time to live a whole new life. And she went to LA, where she had grown up, but in a whole different mindset, free of the pain of the past. As we look at the next slide, we see that when she arrived, she had some very specific things going on. She took her little book, she formed Hay House, and published it as You Can Heal Your Life. Actually, You Can Heal Your Body. And then, over the next few years, published an expanded version, which included some of the other things that she used in her teachings. And it was called You Can Heal Your Life. And almost everyone in this movement has seen or held or owned more than one copy of You Can Heal Your Life, because that little book, Heal Your Body, is an incredible reference. When we're trying to get at the emotional underlying of a physical symptoms, what is the consciousness that has led to these symptoms? She often gives us a very good first step, and sometimes the final step. For me, I usually start with what she offers and then move on with, well, in this case, there's a modification of that for this person. But hey, Heal Your Body, excellent reference, and it is woven into the book, You Can Heal Your Life, which was a marvelous contribution to the lives of thousands of people, starting with the AIDS victims that started to show up in her life. She would speak as a minister in many religious science churches and in various centers. She continued to offer treatments. She supported herself as a practitioner, which means she was charging for treatments. And she used affirmations a lot. And as you will see, a lot of her later work was centered on those affirmations. In the process of working with the AIDS victims, she began to see that there was an underlying consciousness that other people, not her, but other people called a death wish. I, in that period, in 85, 86, was beginning to deal with my own physical issues, and I took a retreat at the Zen Center outside of San Francisco called Green Gulch. And in that retreat, there were several other people, among them a couple of men, a gay couple, who were headed to see, quote, this woman who is curing people of AIDS by helping them get rid of their death wish. And they were going to see her. They were also reading a book by Alice Miller called For Your Own Good, which is about the effects of an authoritarian parent on the children growing up. Well, most of the people who grew up in the 50s and some of the people who grew up in the 60s had very powerful authoritarian parents. So these guys realized there was powerful work to be done, and they had high hopes for the results. Unfortunately, I didn't get to follow up on their history, but I'm believing if they made it down to the hay rides in LA with Louise Hay, they made it through. And part of what she offered to help them get through it is what she called mirror work. I'm going to read some of her words. Mirror work is the most effective method I've found for learning to love yourself and to see the world as a safe and loving place. Think about that. Remember how this woman grew up. Remember how she held her life together. Remember how all of those events happened to her. The self-esteem that she had was as low as you can go. When her husband walked out on her, it went even lower. And beginning to do this work with religious science began to turn things around. She began to experience what happens when you replace an old thought with new thoughts. And so she says, I have been teaching people how to do mirror work for as long as I have been teaching affirmations. The most powerful affirmations are those you say out loud when you are in front of your mirror. And we can just see this woman as she's coming into her 40s, divorced, with no background to lean on, no support. She's no longer able to be a fashion model because now she's in her 40s. What is she going to do? She must have spent hours in front of the mirror to become the Louise Hay that everyone grew to know and love. In the next slide, we see some more of what she has to say about the mirror work. She says, because the mirror reflects back to you the feelings you have about yourself, it makes you immediately aware of where you are resisting and where you are open and flowing. It clearly shows you what thoughts you will need to change if you want to have a joyous, fulfilling life. Now, a lot of kids in the 80s discovered mirror work as sort of a joke, unfortunately, because it was woven into Saturday Night Live. One of the characters, one of their regular skits, was this fella standing in front of the mirror, sitting in front of the mirror, and declaring that he was a good person. So you might want to go back to old editions of Saturday Night Live for that joke. But that tells you how far it went into the community, into the culture, that the idea that one could look in a mirror and affirm something good and have it have a result or experience was very, very well known in the 80s and early 90s. Continuing in this vein, not only do we affirm that which we would wish to see in our world, she tells us when something good happens in your life, you can go to the mirror and say, thank you, that's terrific. Thank you for doing this. You're saying it to yourself. Yes. And there are YouTubers now who are saying, I've been doing mirror work and I'm having amazing results. So you can watch that if you want to, right? And then she says, if something bad happens to you, something that is distressing, right? You can go to the mirror and say, okay, I love you. This thing that just happened will pass, but I love you. And that's forever. For our child self to hear that we are loved forever, because often when something distressing happens, it's our child self that is at the forefront of our awareness. This can be a very, very powerful experience. So even if you're not up to looking in a mirror and saying how wonderful you are, you can at least say thank you for the good things and let the hurt child know that she or he is loved, or they are loved regardless. Now, all of this process of working with these guys and teaching these methods and speaking in these churches and getting the You Can Heal Your Life book out there meant that the publishing house had to grow. So in the next slide, we'll see some of the things that happened by Louise through the Hay House publication, the publishing company. In 84, she brought in an accountant because, well, she didn't have the training to do all of that. And that accountant became the president of Hay House. And he developed Hay House as the New Age book space in the world. And virtually everybody you've ever thought of as a spiritual teacher has been published at Hay House. And then later they actually created a self-publishing house for people who wanted to get their books out in the market as well. You Can Heal Your Life, that was the beginning. But then she went on to some of these others. The power is within you. I can do it. There's more. And then in the 90s, she came up with Empowering Women. She ended up getting an award from Maria Shriver for her work empowering women. Because certainly, if anyone had demonstrated that it was possible to move from victim to empowered woman, that was Louise Hay. Next to the 4 books, there's something called You Can Heal Your Life. And as it appears, that is the video that was produced from her 75th birthday. And then they wove in more, and she's done another video on her 80th birthday and her 85th. And finally, the final photograph there is toward the end of her life. Someone put all together most of the words that she had ever written in the Essential Louise Hay collection. So you can get it all in one volume if you wish, right? Lots and lots of ways to pick up Louise Hay's teachings. And then there were the affirmations. I didn't even bother to try to take photographs or load images of the affirmations. There are so many variations on Louise Hay's affirmations that could be said in front of a mirror or just could be kept handy. You can pull one every day, whatever. There are hundreds of variations. And if you've been even in a thrift store recently, you probably have. Certainly in a used bookstore, you've seen some of Hay's books and some of her affirmation cards in some form or other. In powerful, powerful, powerful things that can be experienced because of Louise Hay's constant efforts to help people discover what can work in our lives. In the next slide, we're going to see the 3rd major piece. First was affirming, second is mirror work, and third is forgiveness. And I have to say this part of Louise's teachings was critical to my own well-being at the time I was going through my major healing process. I had no idea how much resentment I had been carrying and how much pain and anger I had been carrying about the past. So yes, we'll look at this slide now. For most of us, she says, sitting in front of a mirror and facing ourselves is difficult at first. So we call this process mirror work. But as you can sit and continue, you become less self-critical and the work turns into mirror play. Very soon, your mirror becomes your companion, a dear friend. Wouldn't that be nice? Then she asks, would you rather be right? Or would you rather be happy? Looking in the mirror, are you interested in being right when someone does something? Or are you interested in being happy? Are you interested in being right about the past? Or are you interested in being happy now and into the future? She says in the next point, a state of non-forgiveness actually destroys something within ourselves. Forgiveness means giving up our hurtful feelings and just letting the whole thing go. To release the past and experience now, we want to be willing to just let the whole thing go. This was huge for me. I had been taught that forgiveness was, I forgive you. I don't like what you did, but I forgive you anyway. Things like that. What most of us have been taught. But what Louise Hay helps us understand, and she drew this in part from the Course in Miracles, which I also studied during that time. If I can look at the past and experience no upset, no distress, no fear, no anger, no resentment, no, you did the wrong thing, I can look at the past and all the people of the past and experience only love and light when I look at them, then I know I have let the whole thing go. So the process of forgiving is getting to that place where we can actually look in our mind at the person, look in our mind at the situation, feel in our body the distress that we felt, and allow it to be dissolved and released from the body. Allow those feelings to be expressed out of the body until all that's left is the realization that, as the Course in Miracles put it, all that ever happened was someone was trying to say, I love you. Please love me. That's where I had to get to. And that's where Louise encourages us to be able to get to. So in the next slide, we see how many people were able to get to that place. She started with 6 guys in her living room who were saying, I've either got it or someone I love has it. This horrid thing called AIDS. And then it was 9, and then it was 20, and then it was 50. And at 50, they had to rent a room because she couldn't, they were all over everything. They were up and down her stairs. They were on her porch. They were looking in the windows. They rented a room. And then it grew up to 90, and then they had to go to another room. Finally, in the end of the hayride period, there were 900 guys working with her. And she would ride with them in the gay pride parades because they were proud to be who they were. And she was proud to be working with them. What she offered was that safe and supportive environment where people could face the illness and their emotions. They could feel like they belonged and never had that sense of rejection or stigma that was often the case out in the world. What an incredible experience for the men who had been in the closet or barely out of the closet for their whole lives. And her core message, self-love, right? We use the mirror for our self-love and affirmations and that forgiveness of the past. It helped them overcome both the effects, the symptoms, but also the challenges as people around them were passing away or as they were dealing sometimes with the effects of the medications or lingering effects of old symptoms. Well, it was the hayrides that got Oprah's attention. Oprah started telling people about it and brought Louise Hay on, and she brought the book, You Can Heal Your Life. And that was the beginning of the next chapter in Louise's story. Being in that space and teaching self-love, self-forgiveness, forgiveness of others, and affirming what is possible led her to a whole new presence, a global presence, a glowing global presence. And lots of income, which then allowed her to move to a beautiful organic farm in the San Diego area. And she proceeded to live almost completely off the land that she officially owned. And she created a foundation, the Hay Foundation, which was supporting a lot of the folks who were dealing with AIDS and later was getting these materials out to other people. And Hay House continued to grow. More and more authors wanted to be part of this movement. And Louise Hay became a household word for anyone who was aware of the possibility of healing outside of the normal world's way of teaching. Now, as I said, self-love was the key. And in the next slide, she talks about it. She says, first, we have to recognize that self-esteem, self-love, and self-worth, whatever you feel drawn to calling it, is a seed that grows if you water it. Isn't that beautiful? To begin to feel good and beginning to love this person that we see in the mirror, or we put clothes on, or we watch the effects of what we're doing in the world, to begin to love that person was clearly for Louise, for poor Helen Vera, right? The beginning of a life. And not only one life, we can see that shift from the post-divorce totally at the bottom of self-esteem through to functioning with these guys in the hayride to the next level, the Oprah endorsed incredible presence that everyone knows about and has plenty of everything she could ever want and many, many people who love her, right? We can see that happening simply by watering the seed of self-love. She says you start by recognizing you deserve to be loved and you deserve to love yourself. Most of us, especially those of us who experienced parenting in the 50s, 60s, maybe in the early 70s, have to learn that we can be loved. It is okay. People actually have loved us, but we didn't always see it. The important thing for many of us has been think of that person or that group of people who were loving toward us while we were growing up. Then begin to take their love and internalize it. We deserve to love ourselves. She says, when we've been hurt in the past, we sometimes hide parts of ourselves so we can protect ourselves from being hurt again. And boy, aren't there lots of stories and songs about people who have had that experience. And of course, once that protection begins to break down, it hurts so much because all the old hurt and the current hurt happen all together, which again is what happened when Louise was abandoned by her husband way back in the 1960s. So we need to stop hiding those parts of ourselves. That's where the mirror work comes in. And then she says, when we practice loving ourselves, we develop a certain trust that brings us closer to being true to ourselves. A certain trust, a trust that the thoughts I have are worth paying attention to, a trust that I have the capacity to do things, a trust that someone who loves me actually does love me and isn't just saying words. All that kind of trust begins to emerge as we begin to realize that we can be loved and love ourselves. And then she says, that brings us closer to being true to ourselves. So we no longer are trying to be someone out there for someone out there. We're not trying to take care of everybody else. We're no longer trying to make sure everyone else has their needs met or that they think well of us. No, we can start being true to ourselves. And in the next slide, she talks a little more about that as a way to get aware, become aware of our degree of self-love. If you're finding that you're saying or doing things just to appease others, then you're denying your soul's purpose. You're denying yourself happiness. And she says, practice loving yourself often because it's the best way to get closer to who you truly are. And who you are, when she's saying that, she's talking about your spiritual, emotional, and physical self, all as one aligned being, what Emerson referred to as the greater self, the capital S self, Ralph Waldo Emerson in his essay, Self-Reliance. At the very end of her life, she produced a couple more pieces of work, amazing. And in that, she wrote, can you imagine what a whole generation of adults would be like if they had been taught these subjects in school along with their regular curriculum? Can you imagine what that seventh grader that you know or have known might be like if that person had been clear that they could love themselves and that they were worthy of being loved? Those peer group put downs probably wouldn't be happening nearly so much, right? Can you imagine what would happen if the teenagers that we know that get caught up in drugs or gangs or whatever knew that they were loved and felt their own self-love? Do you think they'd get caught up in those gangs or drugs? No, there's no room for it. They understand. They see through it. Yes. And as we look around at the adults in our lives, and often they are the ones who show up as celebrities or as politicians, wow, if they had been taught self-love and forgiveness and the power of affirmations early on, what an incredible difference it would make in their life and in all of our lives. Now, Louise, as I say, learned to write a book, learned to run a company, and learned a few other things along the way. So one of the things that she learned was the effect and the power of our past thoughts, what I believe. All the events you have experienced were created the thoughts and words you used, she says. Yesterday, last week, last month, last year, however many years ago, depending on how old you are. What is important in this moment is what you are choosing and to think and believe and say right now. For these thoughts and words will create your future. And obviously, she knew this from experience. It wasn't just a principle that she had learned studying Ernest Holmes' Science of Mind or listening to the various ministers and teachers along the way. It was something that she had tested and proven, very much as Quimby tested and proved to himself the role of changing one's mind in healing the body. Or as Myrtle Fillmore did when her body's illness was dissolved as she changed her thinking and speaking, right? These people have tested this. It is proven. Or Nona Brooks, who not only healed her own self, but hundreds and thousands of other people experienced healing, removal of symptoms completely because she thought and believed and said the words that were in total alignment with her spirit being, her emotional being, and her physical being. Yes? And Louise goes on to say, your point of power is in the present moment, right now. And it doesn't matter what's happened in the past, and it doesn't matter what might be happening in the future, because right now, all power, all presence, all knowing, all knowledge, all awareness is here. And we can know and express and experience the truth. And she says, the only thing we are ever dealing with is a thought. And a thought can be changed. The essence of the New Thought movement. Yes. In the next slide, we find that she found some people had a little problem taking on these teachings. And in a chapter called Resistance to Change, she said virtually all our ills and problems stem from the attitude toward ourselves that was programmed when we were tiny children. And she proved that to herself also by eliminating the cancer in that part of the body that she had begun to have a lot of distress around because of abuse. Yes? Yes. She goes on and says, our experiences since then are based upon what we accepted and believed about ourselves and about life at that time. How many of us made decisions when we were 3 or 4 or 5, and we are living out those same decisions today? How many of us made decisions about the opposite sex when we were teenagers, and we are living that out today? How many of us have made decisions about how the world works in terms of money or violence or whatever as we were watching TV or as we were getting our first jobs, and we are living that out today? That's how it works. Our experiences since then were based upon what we accepted and believed about ourselves and about life at that time. She says the way we were treated when we were very little is usually the way we treat ourselves now. So if you know someone who's pretty harsh with their language toward people around them, just think about how much harsher she or he is toward him or herself, because that's the language that person grew up with. There's some marvelous illustrations of that in movies and in films where someone is following the bully home and then sees what kind of home environment the bully is experiencing. Yeah? Yeah. So the thing to be aware of is when we have that harsh criticism, she says in the next point, the person you are scolding is the 3-year-old child within you. And how many of us, when we were in that 30-month terrible twos, 30 months between about 26 months and about 34 months. Wow, yes. That period where it seems like everything the parents are saying is, no, you can't do that. No, stop doing that. No, right? That's the person we're scolding when we're scolding today. Those are the people we are reacting to when we're reacting to people in authority today. That's the set of beliefs, thoughts, and understandings we need to go into that forgiveness process and completely let go to the point where all that's left, as the Course in Miracles says, is the love and the light that is the truth of our being and theirs. Yes? And that last line, so important. Be aware that where you do not want to change is exactly the area where you need to change the most. Ow. Ow. Sometimes because it's just too painful to go back there. I get that. And sometimes it's because we think we've got it handled. Oh, I'm fine there. I don't need to deal with anything there. Believe me, if you think that's the case, you probably need to go there. So wherever you're feeling like, oh, I don't need to change, or oh, I don't want to, take a look, because that's probably the piece that's keeping you from living the life of your dreams. Yes. Isn't it interesting that it took Louise not only to go through all of the distress, but to be surrounded by guys in even greater distress than anything she had experienced? Oh my goodness. To rise above that and to see only the beauty and the joy, see the beautiful beings they were, know the love and the light that is who they are as well as she is, to do that work with them and for them for months. And then the transformation happened. And that next stage, that dream life, came to pass. Indeed. Well, as she moved into that dream life, she began to see even more. She began to talk about building the new. She says, learn to think in these positive affirmations. We tend to think in negative affirmations. And she says that saying, I hate my job will get you nowhere. Continually make positive statements in how you want your life to be. That's what she was doing. And then she says, and this is key in Louise Hay's teaching, and a lot of us had to learn it, make your statement in the present tense. I am, or I have, she says in the next point, your subconscious mind, that unconscious aspect of ourself that's bringing into form, right, as we learned last week, your subconscious mind is such an obedient servant that if you declare in the future sense, I will have or I want, then that's the idea will always stay. It'll stay out there. It's somewhere else, right? It's never now. In Alice in Wonderland, it was jam every other day, never today, if you have to remember this with an image, right? Then she says, it will always stay out of your reach. And then the old thought patterns begin to reassert themselves. So we need to say it again in the presence. I am, I have. And as we learned with Neville, we need to feel that and see that and have it be so real to us. It can't be anything else. Yes? So we can shift our focus back to the new thought. And in the next slide, we see that Louise began to express herself in other ways. Excuse me. The picture of her in front of the painting, it's her very last in a series of paintings. And there actually was an art show of Louise Hay's art in Venice in the years 2000. Excuse me. Well, finally, Louise lived in her oasis, beautiful flowers and vegetables and plants. And she lived and went through her 80th birthday. She had a huge conference and produced a video. Her 85th birthday, she released a whole bunch of new books and new apps online. But in August of 2017, Louise Hay passed peacefully at home at the age of 90, surrounded by people who loved her, loving herself. And that is the life of Louise Hay, the ultimate 20th century New Thought teacher. Thank you so much for joining me in this whole series. It's been a delight to work with you. Have a marvelous life.